Welcome, dear listeners, to the charming village of Marleycombe, where winter has laid its frosty fingers across the hedgerows, and the soft glow of Christmas lights twinkles from every window. The aroma of spiced mulled wine drifts from the market stalls, mingling with the crisp scent of pine and the faint smoke from cozy chimneys. Laughter and cheerful chatter echo through the town square as villagers bustle about, wrapped in scarves and smiles. Today, we begin a tale of intrigue and gentle suspense, a fatal toast at the Christmas garden party. Have you ever attended a holiday gathering where secrets seem to shimmer quietly behind the decorations? Step closer and let us see what lies beneath the cheerful veneer of a perfect village celebration. The annual Christmas garden party in Marleycombe was unfolding with all the delight and charm one might expect from a village so proud of its festive traditions. Children dashed between stalls, their laughter ringing like silver bells through the frosty air, while the scent of pine mingled with roasted chestnuts, curling warmly around the noses of villagers wrapped in woolen scarves and cozy coats. Lanterns glimmered along the garden paths, casting soft pools of golden light upon the snow-dusted flower beds, and the tinkling of piano music floated gently from the bandstand. In the center of it all, the host lifted a crystal glass, calling for a toast to friendship, health, and the joys of the season. But the cheerful moment turned suddenly grim. The clink of glasses was followed by a startled gasp. The prominent Mr. Hargrave crumpled to the ground, his face pale beneath the glow of lantern light. Panic fluttered through the crowd like errant candle smoke, and voices rose in shocked whispers. Yet, amidst the commotion, Miss Marple sat quietly on a nearby bench, knitting needles poised and eyes sharp, noticing a slightly ajar garden gate, a flicker of unease in the host's expression, and hushed exchanges in shadowed corners. Now, dear listener, I must ask, would you have noticed what Miss Marple sees? The game of observation has begun. Chapter 1. Whispers Among the Holly. The morning after the Christmas garden party dawned crisp and clear, the village of Marleycombe wrapped in a delicate frost that sparkled on every eave and hedgerow. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, curling toward the pale winter sky, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with a lingering sweetness of roasted chestnuts. Inside the warm confines of the Red Lion tea room, a gentle hum of conversation had already begun, for the events of the previous evening had left the villagers restless, curious, and eager to exchange their theories. Mrs. Penworthy, seated at her usual corner table near the window, spoke with indignation, her hands fluttering over her teacup. It was simply the vicar's nerves, she insisted, her voice carrying over the soft clink of china. Anyone with half an ounce of sense could see he was flustered. He's never managed large gatherings so well. Across the table, young Alice Trent's eyes were wide with excitement. But I saw. Truly, I did. Someone slipped something into the glass. Just before the toast, she whispered, leaning close, as if the walls themselves might listen. Miss Marple, seated quietly with her teacup raised in polite amusement, allowed the conversation to flow around her without interruption. She sipped the steaming tea, noting the inconsistencies and contradictions in each story. The vicar, she recalled, had been unusually calm after the initial shock, a fact that did not quite match Mrs. Penworthy's assertion of fluttering nerves. Alice's eagerness to blame a mysterious hand was also telling, hinting at youthful imagination, or perhaps an instinct she herself could not yet articulate. Villagers continued to murmur among themselves, exchanging secrets in hushed tones, leaning across tables, and glancing nervously at each other, as if the frost outside had somehow carried with it an invisible tension. Miss Marple listened carefully, her keen mind quietly mapping out relationships, rivalries, and past grievances. She observed who lingered close to the hostess, who avoided the glance of the vicar, and who spoke a little too quickly when asked a simple question. Every gesture, every hesitation, every faint smile held meaning, if one had the patience to notice. Her gaze wandered naturally toward the garden just beyond the tea-room windows, where the morning sunlight gilded the frosted hedges. And there, half hidden among the holly bushes, catching the glint of winter light, was a small handkerchief embroidered with an elegant monogram. It seemed oddly out of place, a delicate emblem of someone who did not belong among the damp leaves and frost. Miss Marple's lips pressed together in quiet thought. The chatter in the tea-room continued unabated, oblivious to her discovery, but the detective's mind had already begun turning, weaving together hints, gestures, and small observations into a tapestry of hidden truths. That handkerchief, she realized, might be far more significant than anyone suspected. Miss Marple stepped out into the crisp morning air, a wicker basket in hand, ostensibly to gather holly for a modest wreath she intended to hang above her sitting-room mantel. The garden sparkled under a delicate frost, every twig and leaf edged in glistening white. Yet beneath the beauty, her sharp eyes caught irregularities that hinted at the disturbance of the previous evening. Footprints marred the otherwise pristine soil near the party's center, some shallow and hesitant, others firm and purposeful, tracing curious paths toward the wrought iron gate at the far end of the garden. The gate, slightly ajar even in the bright morning, seemed to beckon her scrutiny. "Miss Marple," called a timid voice, and the elderly detective turned to see young Thomas, the house's footman, hovering nervously at the garden door. I thought you might like to know, sir," he stammered. "The garden gate was moved again last night, sometime before dawn. I saw it myself when fetching coals for the kitchen fire." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully, noting the boy's unease. "Did you see anyone, Thomas?" she asked gently. "No, ma'am," he said, wringing his hands. "But it was quite odd, sir. The gate usually stays shut after dark." As she wandered closer to the scene of the footprints, Miss Marple's eyes followed the muddy tracks, each print carrying a story. Some ended abruptly, others veered sharply toward the shrubbery, almost as though the walker had hesitated mid-step, reconsidering their course. There was a certain rhythm to the disturbance, subtle but deliberate. Her fingers brushed over a stray holly sprig, yet her attention remained fixed on the footprints and the frosted path leading to the gate. A few paces further, the gardener appeared, leaning on his spade with an air of casual indifference that failed to disguise a trace of tension. "Good morning, Mr. Langley," Miss Marple greeted warmly. "I wonder if you might help me understand these impressions near the gate. They seem rather unusual." The man's jaw tightened subtly. I can't say, Miss Marple. Might have been the wind, or a stray fox, perhaps." His eyes flicked toward the house, avoiding hers. Miss Marple nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation at face value, while quietly filing away the subtle evasions and hesitation. The man's reluctance told her far more than words could. As she turned back toward the drawing-room windows, a fleeting movement caught her attention, a shadow, tall and indistinct, crossing the glass. Not a soul inside seemed to notice, their chatter and morning routines oblivious. Yet Miss Marple's keen eyes were not so easily deceived. The figure lingered only a moment, then vanished into the house's interior, leaving her with the unsettling certainty that some secrets moved unseen, just beyond the comfort of the village's cheerful facade. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly in her mind as she prepared to follow the trail, aware that every quiet detail might lead her closer to the truth. Chapter 2: Candles and Concealments. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the frosted windows of the village hall, illuminating the remnants of last night's festivities. Garlanded beams still held the twinkle of small lanterns, and pine boughs lay scattered like green confetti across the polished floor. Miss Marple moved carefully among the tables, her eyes sweeping over the room as though it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. She noted immediately the faint dusting of a white powder on the mantelpiece, seemingly insignificant yet strangely out of place amidst the meticulous holiday decorations. Near the dessert table, muddy footprints crisscrossed the polished wooden floor. They did not match the pattern of the host or any of the staff Miss Marple knew well. Each print seemed deliberate, as if the walker had paused and reconsidered their path multiple times, a nervousness betraying something more than mere clumsiness. A crystal wine glass rested slightly askew on the table, a different shape from the others. In Miss Marple's practice, I caught the subtle smudge at its rim. Clearly, it had been handled differently, perhaps even hastily cleaned or replaced. Villagers were already gathering, eager to share their theories. Mrs. Penworthy, bustling with indignation, insisted that it must have been the vicar, while young Alice Trent leaned over a friend to recount her version of events, each embellishment more elaborate than the last. Miss Marple listened politely, sipping her tea, nodding just enough to encourage conversation without allowing the chatter to distract her from the details that mattered most. A faint scent lingered near the dessert table, delicate and sweet. Almonds, or perhaps marzipan, but tinged with something sharper, almost medicinal. Miss Marple bent slightly to inspect the napkin lying under the wine glass, and noted a tiny smudge that suggested a hurried hand or nervous tremor. Beneath the cracker box, half hidden and slightly crumpled, lay a small note, its words obscured but hinting at a message left for someone specific. Each detail, when considered alone, might have seemed trivial. Together, they formed a subtle pattern, one that her mind began to untangle with quiet precision. She straightened and glanced at the constable, who had been pacing near the doorway, nodding gravely as he addressed the gathering crowd. His voice carried authority and finality, a confidence born of certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we have a suspect in custody. We believe the matter is resolved." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Though the villagers murmured in relief, her mind raced. Something in the constable's words, in the timing of the arrest, and in the pattern of small, overlooked details, told her the story was far from complete. She allowed herself a quiet moment to observe, to measure, and to consider, all while the village buzzed with relief that might be entirely premature. The drawing room of the host's house was warm, fragrant with pine and the lingering aroma of yesterday's spiced wine, yet beneath the cozy surface tension clung thickly, like fog in a narrow alley. The villagers had gathered in polite rows, whispering among themselves with occasional glances toward the young man who now stood at the center, his hands trembling and eyes wide. He protested vehemently, voice quivering, insisting he had no part in the fatal toast, yet his words seemed to fall upon ears eager for resolution rather than truth. Mrs. Penworthy shook her head, muttering darkly about how the guilty always protested too much, while Alice Trent tugged at the sleeve of a friend, whispering that she had known it all along. Even the vicar's composed expression betrayed the tiniest flicker of satisfaction at the swift conclusion. Everyone appeared eager to pin the blame, to close the unsettling chapter with a neat, if misplaced, resolution. Miss Marple, seated quietly at the edge of the room with her knitting resting idly in her lap, allowed the accusations to wash over her. Her keen eyes, however, noticed what others dismissed. The young man's alibi, though poorly rehearsed in the villagers' eyes, seemed entirely plausible if one took into account the hidden passageway she had glimpsed the previous afternoon while wandering near the garden shed. His route, overlooked by all but her, could place him far from the toast at the crucial moment. She noted the tension in his shoulders, the careful avoidance of certain gazes, and the hesitant way he responded to questions, behavior that suggested anxiety born of circumstance rather than guilt. Quietly, Miss Marple began weaving together a web of subtle behavioral clues and long-buried village rivalries. There was Mr. Hargrave's unspoken dispute with the baker, the whispered quarrel over the allotments between Mrs. Penworthy and her neighbors, and even minor grievances circulating among servants and staff, all fragments that might illuminate the true sequence of events. Each observation she recorded mentally, cataloging what was said, what was avoided, and what remained unspoken. Her gaze, sweeping the room once more, paused unexpectedly. In the pocket of the young man's coat, half concealed beneath the fold of fabric, peeked a small, monogrammed handkerchief. Its embroidery glinted faintly in the lamplight, and a chill ran down her spine as she recognized the familiar initials, an unmistakable match to the handkerchief she had noticed tucked among the holly bushes the morning after the party. Miss Marple's lips pressed together in quiet thought, her knitting needles resting briefly as she considered the implications. Here was a clue the villagers had overlooked, a tangible thread that could unravel a carefully concealed truth. The young man's protestations, the villagers' eagerness to condemn, and the subtle tensions in the drawing room now coalesced into something far more complex than a simple act of misfortune or clumsy guilt. Outside, the winter sunlight shimmered on the frost, but inside, the shadows of doubt grew longer, and Miss Marple knew the path to understanding would require patience, observation, and careful unraveling of the village's tightly held secrets. Chapter 3: The Wrong Suspect. The village square of Marleycombe had never felt so charged with tension. A cold winter wind swept through the streets, rustling paper wrappers and scattering loose leaves, while inside the Red Lion tea room, villagers whispered fervently among themselves. The constable, now accompanied by 2 uniformed officers, formally placed the young man under arrest. His hands were cuffed lightly, his face pale, yet he maintained his innocence with quiet dignity, his voice firm despite the tremor that betrayed his anxiety. Immediately, the square erupted with speculation. Mrs. Penworthy wagged her finger as she recounted every misstep of the evening before, asserting that the young man had been too nervous, too fidgety, too obviously involved. Alice Trent, cheeks flushed with excitement, leaned close to anyone who would listen, claiming she had predicted the arrest all along. Opinions flew like sparks from a fire. Some declared it a tragic misunderstanding. Others were certain of guilt, while a few, less vocal, murmured that the truth was rarely so simple. Miss Marple stood quietly near the corner, her gloved hands folded calmly in front of her. She listened, eyes scanning faces, noting every twitch of a mouth, every subtle narrowing of the eyes, every glance that lingered too long or darted away too quickly. Villagers spoke freely, revealing more than they intended about rivalries, grudges, and hidden alliances. One could hear the faint hiss of a whisper about a forgotten debt, a quietly nurtured jealousy, or a simmering feud over garden plots. Yet the details, when considered collectively, did not align neatly with the constable's confident assertion. Certain timelines were inconsistent. The witness statements contradicted one another in small but meaningful ways. Miss Marple's brow furrowed in quiet contemplation, her mind tracing the interwoven threads of observation. She could not shake the feeling that the arrest, though seemingly decisive, might be only a convenient conclusion for those eager to restore order. Later that afternoon, a small brown envelope was delivered to her cottage, carried by the village postman whose face wore a mixture of curiosity and unease. Miss Marple carefully broke the seal and withdrew a letter written in an unfamiliar, hurried script. Its contents were brief yet chilling. A cryptic warning that the true culprit remained at large, still hidden among those who smiled politely and sipped tea as if nothing had occurred. Miss Marple folded the letter deliberately, placing it in her pocket as her sharp eyes scanned the frosted window panes. Outside, the village continued its gentle routines. Children practicing sled races along the narrow lanes, villagers exchanging pleasantries, unaware of the quiet danger lurking beneath their familiar streets. Her knitting needles clicked softly as she pondered the message, each stitch a reminder that appearances were deceptive and that human nature, even in the quaintest of villages, could conceal darker impulses. The arrest might satisfy the restless chatter of Marleycombe, but she knew better. The threads of truth were far from resolved, and her careful attention would be needed to untangle them fully. Miss Marple lingered quietly at the edge of the party host's drawing room later that day, ostensibly to admire the lingering sparkle of holly garlands and the delicate scent of cinnamon and pine. Yet beneath the carefully arranged decorations and the cheerful chatter of villagers, her sharp eyes discerned tensions invisible to most. Smiles, she observed, were often masks, and behind each polite nod or courteous comment lay subtle signs of discontent, carefully hidden from casual notice. Her attention first fell on the hostess herself, Mrs. Hargrave, who seemed almost too composed in the aftermath of tragedy. Miss Marple noted the twitch of a brow as she laughed at a minor jest, the quick glance toward her husband that betrayed a mixture of concern and irritation. Nearby, the quiet vicar, typically reserved and gentlemanly, lingered just a touch too long beside Mrs. Penworthy, exchanging a few whispered words. Their conversation was punctuated by slight smiles that did not quite reach their eyes, suggesting that old grievances and ambitions lay just beneath the surface of civility. As she moved among the small clusters of villagers, Miss Marple made careful mental notes of other subtle interactions. A casual remark about garden allotments revealed a long-standing dispute between two neighbors, their forced politeness belying simmering envy. A discussion of the upcoming winter fete exposed resentment over roles in the village committee, while hushed comments on inheritances and property hinted at rivalries dating back decades. Even the servants, attentive and polite, cast brief glances that conveyed disapproval or impatience at circumstances beyond their control. Miss Marple quietly catalogued the network of relationships, tracing lines of motive that might never be openly admitted. Jealousy, greed, resentment, and the desire for social standing. All were present, carefully disguised beneath the polished surface of Christmas cheer. It was remarkable, she reflected, how a single misstep could reveal so much about human nature in a small village. Her reflections were interrupted by the arrival of a small crowd at the local bake sale that afternoon. The villagers had gathered to enjoy pastries and warm drinks, eager for the comfort of routine after the unsettling events at the garden party. Yet something immediately felt amiss. A young girl, reaching for a sugar-coated tart, recoiled in alarm, her mother hastily pulling the pastry away. A thin line of white powder had settled on its surface, narrowly avoided before ingestion. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, a flicker of concern crossing her features. The message was unmistakable. Someone was emboldened, testing boundaries, perhaps daring the village to notice. Beneath the warmth of laughter and the scent of fresh cakes, a quiet threat had emerged. The game, she realized, was far from over, and the true danger remained concealed among those smiling faces. With a final sip of her tea, Miss Marple tucked these observations away, preparing to follow the threads wherever they might lead, certain that each small, hidden detail would prove crucial in unmasking the person willing to strike once more. Chapter 4: Frosted Letters and Hidden Rivalries. The soft patter of rain against the window did little to disturb the serene calm of Miss Marple's sitting room. Yet inside, her mind was fully engaged in the quiet unraveling of human folly. Letters, brittle with age and carefully preserved in a cedar box, lay spread before her on the polished mahogany table. Their envelopes bore the delicate script of villagers long gone, correspondences filled with whispered confessions, veiled threats, and declarations of passion or discontent. Each word hinted at lives intertwined in ways that the current generation had conveniently forgotten, yet their echoes now seemed startlingly relevant to the events of the Christmas garden party. One letter, yellowed at the edges, revealed a feud over the recent division of the village allotments. Mrs. Penworthy's name appeared repeatedly, paired with a subtle scorn directed at her rival, the vicar's housekeeper, whose neat handwriting hinted at restrained, simmering resentment. Another letter, fragrant with the faint scent of lavender, recounted a flirtation between the late Mr. Hargrave and a visiting governess, details that might have seemed inconsequential at the time, but now carried weight when paired with the careful placement of objects of the garden party. Miss Marple traced a sequence in her mind. The timing of the fatal toast coincided not only with the movement of certain villagers near the dessert table, but also with subtle tensions that had persisted quietly beneath the polite smiles. She considered the placement of holly sprigs, the arrangement of napkins, the slightly mismatched wine glass, a seemingly trivial detail that now appeared deliberate in light of these old correspondences. The patterns were emerging, a tapestry woven from envy, rivalry, and carefully concealed grievances, all intersecting on a night meant to celebrate community and cheer. As she sorted through another packet of letters, her knitting paused mid-stitch. The interwoven narratives suggested more than mere coincidence. There were threads of jealousy and ambition that connected the deceased with nearly every prominent villager. The thought settled heavily on her shoulders. In a village so small, the shadow of old resentments could reach far into the present, shaping events in subtle, almost invisible ways. Her reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. The postman had delivered a visitor's card, and a few minutes later, a stranger entered the warm glow of her sitting room. Tall and precise, with a coat dusted by the lingering frost of the village lanes, he introduced himself as a close acquaintance of Mr. Hargrave. His eyes were sharp, and his voice carried the authority of one who had witnessed matters firsthand. "I believe," he said quietly, leaning closer, "that I can shed light on certain grievances that Mr. Hargrave held close. Grievances that were not meant to be discovered, and yet may be crucial to understanding his untimely death." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. The visitor's arrival was no mere coincidence. There were truths yet to be revealed, and the web of hidden rivalries in Marleycombe had just grown more tangled. The visitor's presence in Marleycombe cast an immediate ripple across the calm surface of village life. Though to most he appeared merely as a polite stranger, interested in the tragic events of the Christmas garden party. Miss Marple, however, was attentive to subtleties that others overlooked. The tilt of his hat, the way his eyes lingered on certain objects, the carefully measured pauses before he spoke. Every gesture, she noted, seemed purposeful, hinting at knowledge not freely shared and alliances not visible to casual observation. He began recounting events leading up to Mr. Hargrave's collapse with a precision that bordered on unsettling, offering insights into the victim's dealings, secret meetings, and exchanges that had never been openly acknowledged. There were references to debts quietly demanded, to favors owed and left unpaid, and to conversations that might, in the wrong hands, expose old betrayals. Miss Marple listened, knitting needles resting idly in her lap, her mind tracing each thread. Certain points directly contradicted accounts she had gathered from villagers, details about who was present at what time, who had entered the garden unnoticed, and who had been seen exchanging glances that suggested more than simple camaraderie. A name here, a vague gesture there, slowly sketched a web of hidden alliances and motives that even the village gossips had failed to perceive. Miss Marple made quiet mental notes, cataloging every discrepancy and subtle hesitation. She paid particular attention to the visitor's glances at her own correspondence, the letters she had meticulously studied, and the way he referenced events as though he had been present at them himself. Even in recounting half-truths, he revealed far more than he intended, and Miss Marple's mind worked rapidly to connect these glimpses with the pattern of behavior she had already observed among the villagers. Outside, the snow began to fall lightly, dusting the garden paths and rooftops in a soft, white blanket. The world seemed hushed, peaceful, and perfectly ordinary, but Miss Marple knew appearances were deceptive. By evening, the visitor excused himself, promising to return with further information, and departed into the softly falling snow. Hours passed, yet he did not return. When the front door clicked shut in the stillness, Miss Marple noticed a faint trace lingering in the room, a delicate perfume, floral yet sharp, one she had encountered before in a setting both domestic and intimate. Her sharp eyes scanned the empty doorway and then the snow-laden garden beyond, where footprints led away in multiple directions, some fading quickly under fresh flurries. The visitor's sudden disappearance carried the unmistakable air of a deliberate act. He was not merely lost in the winter gloom. He had left a message, or perhaps a warning, in the subtle scent that now clung faintly to the hearth and curtains. Miss Marple tucked the clue carefully into her mind, recognizing that the seemingly minor detail, a familiar fragrance, might hold significance when pieced together with the letters, the hidden rivalries, and the carefully concealed behaviors of those around her. In Marleycombe, even the smallest trace could illuminate a hidden truth, and she resolved to follow it wherever it might lead. Chapter 5. A Twist of Frost. The village hall was alive with the cheerful chaos of the Christmas pageant rehearsal. Children in bright costumes tripped over oversized shoes. Parents whispered last-minute instructions, and the scent of pine boughs mingled with the lingering aroma of freshly baked mince pies. The atmosphere was meant to be festive, yet an undercurrent of tension hummed through the room, a residue of the shocking events at the Christmas garden party. Villagers exchanged furtive glances, still unsettled by the arrest of the young man and the arrival of the mysterious visitor. At the center of the hall, a cluster of guests raised their glasses in a playful toast to the upcoming performance. Laughter tinkled lightly, and the children paused to watch the adult ceremony with wide-eyed anticipation. Then, in a moment that seemed to freeze time, the laughter cut off abruptly. One of the elder guests, Mrs. Weatherby, suddenly swayed, her glass slipping from her hand as she collapsed to the floor. Gasps erupted, children shrieked, and the hall was plunged into a chaotic mix of panic and confusion. Villagers rushed forward, some calling for assistance, others backing away with expressions of alarm. The constable arrived swiftly, trying to restore calm, while whispers of fear and suspicion spread through the room like a cold draft. Questions were asked in hurried, anxious tones. Had someone poisoned her? Was this connected to the previous night's events? Eyes darted from neighbor to neighbor, searching for answers, each glance heavy with uncertainty and unspoken accusation. Miss Marple, seated quietly near a corner, remained composed, her hands folded over her knitting. She observed each reaction carefully. The sudden pallor of some, the avoidance of eye contact by others, and the faint tremor of hands that suggested guilt or anxiety. Unlike the panicked villagers, she noticed the small, telling gestures, the subtle shifting of weight, the way one or two individuals seemed to watch the constable more than the victim, and the tiny, almost imperceptible signs that revealed who was unsettled and who was merely shocked by circumstance. As the scene gradually calmed, Miss Marple's attention shifted to the victim herself. A small envelope, dislodged in her fall, tumbled to the floor. Miss Marple retrieved it gently, unfolding the paper to reveal a cryptic note, its handwriting hurried and deliberate. The words hinted at the original garden party incident, connecting the two collapses in a manner far too precise to be mere coincidence. Miss Marple's mind began turning, threading the faint patterns between the accidents, the notes, and the reactions of those around her. Panic had revealed much, and the subtle, almost invisible hints left behind were waiting to be traced carefully. The village, once calm and festive, now carried the unmistakable scent of hidden danger, and Miss Marple knew that understanding these small details would be crucial in uncovering the truth. Back in the warmth of her sitting room, Miss Marple settled into her favorite armchair, the crackle of the fire punctuating the quiet hum of thought. Before her lay a neatly arranged collection of notes, letters, and small objects she had gathered over the past days. The monogrammed handkerchief found among the holly bushes, the muddy footprints leading to the slightly ajar garden gate, the mismatched wine glasses, and the various letters exposing long-forgotten rivalries. Each item seemed insignificant in isolation, yet when considered together, they formed a subtle tapestry of human behavior, careful deception, and concealed motives. Her knitting rested idly in her lap, as she traced the threads connecting one observation to the next. The handkerchief suggested a presence at the garden during the fatal toast. The footprints confirmed the movement of someone attempting to go unnoticed. The misplaced wine glasses indicated a deliberate tampering. And the letters, combined with her own recollections of whispered exchanges, revealed interpersonal friction hidden beneath the smiles and polite conversation of the villagers. Even the second incident at the pageant, previously dismissed as an unfortunate accident, now fit into a pattern, a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to provoke fear, confusion, and misdirection. Outside, the village remained unaware of the quiet, analytical storm taking place in Miss Marple's sitting room. Shopkeepers went about their morning routines, children squealed in the frost-bitten playground, and mothers exchanged snippets of gossip over steaming teapots. Yet none of this superficial calm could obscure the tension Miss Marple discerned. Subtle glances exchanged in passing, whispers that trailed off when overheard, and small gestures that hinted at unease. She catalogued each with meticulous care, understanding that human behavior often betrayed truth far more reliably than confession. Her mind lingered on the inconsistencies she had observed in testimony. Villagers' statements overlapped, contradicted, or omitted essential details, yet each anomaly contributed a small piece to the puzzle. With patience, these fragments began to coalesce into an invisible map, tracing the likely movements and intentions of those present during both the garden party and the pageant incident. As she pondered the growing pattern, a soft knock at the door interrupted her concentration. The gardener, Mr. Langley, entered quietly, his face partially obscured by the brim of his cap. In a hushed tone, he leaned close and murmured, "Miss Marple, you may wish to be cautious. I have reason to believe the culprit may strike again soon." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, the faint flicker of a smile playing at her lips. The warning, though understated, confirmed the thread she had been following. This was no mere accident, and the danger was far from over. Every detail, the handkerchief, the footprints, the letters, the subtle discrepancies in behavior, was now part of a larger design. The pieces were in place, yet the final moves of the unseen player remained to be revealed. Chapter 6: The Final Trap. The drawing room of the Hargraves' home had been transformed once more for a subtle experiment in observation. Miss Marple, ever unassuming, had invited key villagers under the pretext of a Christmas toast rehearsal, framing it as a harmless opportunity to perfect the upcoming festivities. The room glimmered with seasonal cheer. Pine garlands wound around the mantel, candles flickered in brass holders, and the soft clatter of teacups added a rhythmic cadence to the gentle chatter. Yet beneath the surface, Miss Marple had arranged the space with quiet intention, each object, each placement, designed to reveal what mere conversation could not. Wine glasses, deliberately mismatched, stood on the side table alongside a small stack of envelopes that appeared unremarkable but were chosen to provoke recognition. Holly sprigs were scattered in precise locations, echoing the arrangements from the ill-fated garden party, and the monogrammed handkerchief, carefully displayed on a chair back, glimmered innocently in the warm lamplight. Every detail was calculated, every gesture deliberate, as Miss Marple knew human nature would reveal itself when people believed they were unobserved. The villagers, chatting politely and sipping spiced wine, were largely unaware of the experiment taking place. Miss Marple positioned herself quietly at the edge of the room, knitting needles in hand, observing every expression, every fleeting glance, every shift of posture. Whispers floated through the air, small comments, cautious questions, and tentative recollections of past grievances. To the casual observer, it was a charming rehearsal, yet Miss Marple's sharp mind recorded every hint, every tremor, and every tiny slip of composure. As the toast proceeded, she noted subtle indicators of nervousness, a slight stiffening in a shoulder, a faint flush creeping across a cheek, the way one villager's gaze repeatedly darted toward the planted handkerchief. Each reaction was catalogued silently in her mind. By controlling the environment, she allowed the pressure of observation to work quietly, provoking tension without overt accusation. Anxiety, after all, often revealed truths that words could not. Then it happened. One of the villagers froze mid-sip, eyes widening, a hand trembling over glass. The reaction was almost theatrical in its intensity, too vivid to be mere coincidence. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked lightly together as she watched, her sharp eyes taking in the full measure of surprise, alarm, and fleeting panic. This was the moment she had anticipated. A small, carefully orchestrated nudge had exposed a crack in the mask of composure, hinting at guilt lurking beneath the practiced politeness of the drawing-room smiles. Even as the villagers murmured and tried to maintain their casual demeanor, Miss Marple knew she had seen something vital. The planted objects, the orchestrated toasts, the subtle cues, they had done their work. The game of psychological observation was yielding results, and the truth, long concealed behind polite laughter and festive cheer, was beginning to emerge from the shadows. The drawing room, warm and fragrant with pine and simmering spice cider, now felt charged with an undercurrent of tension, almost imperceptible to anyone but the keenest observer. Miss Marple remained seated near the hearth, knitting resting lightly in her lap, her eyes sweeping across the gathered villagers as if she were reading a carefully written manuscript. To the untrained eye, the scene was charming and festive. Laughter fluttered through the air, children practiced carols in the corner, and everyone sipped their drinks politely. Yet beneath the surface, subtle signs of unease wove through the gathering, like threads of frost glinting under warm light. She noticed the slight tremor in Mr. Hargrave's nephew's hand as he reached for a glass, the repeated darting of eyes toward the front door, and the gentle tightening of shoulders whenever a comment touched on the previous garden party. The faint, almost imperceptible sway in Mrs. Penworthy's posture suggested a mind preoccupied with guilt or worry. Miss Marple catalogued each detail silently, her mental ledger growing heavier with each subtle twitch, pause, or hesitation. She understood that nervous tics, these tiny betrayals of human behavior, often carried more truth than any spoken confession. Even the children, busy with their carol practice, offered clues in their observation of adults. The way one of the older boys kept stealing glances at a particular corner, or how the youngest clung slightly closer to a certain villager as if sensing the tension. Miss Marple's eyes flitted from face to face, storing these small, easily overlooked gestures alongside the evidence of handkerchiefs, footprints, and mismatched glasses she had collected over the past week. In a quiet moment, she exchanged a knowing glance with the constable, standing near the mantel as though supervising the proceedings. Their eyes met briefly, unspoken understanding passing between them. The suspect's carefully constructed mask was beginning to crack. The constable's stiff posture betrayed anticipation, and Miss Marple felt the subtle surge of confirmation that her deductions were on the right track. The festive cheer that enveloped the room grew increasingly strained under her quiet scrutiny. Conversations became slightly clipped, laughter faltered mid-note, and glances toward exits multiplied, each one more suspicious than the last. Miss Marple observed patiently, letting the tension build, allowing the suspect's instincts to reveal themselves without direct accusation. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the culmination of subtle anxiety manifested in a bold and reckless attempt. The suspect shifted suddenly toward the door, glancing over their shoulder with evident urgency. Their movement, abrupt and out of rhythm with the ongoing toast rehearsal, drew every eye in the room for just a fraction of a second. Miss Marple's sharp gaze fixed on the figure, registering the slight stumble, the nervous clutch of a sleeve, the flicker of panic across a face that had so far maintained deceptive composure. In that instant, the thread she had been observing for days began to snap into place. The attempt to escape revealed more than any word or gesture could, confirming what she had long suspected. Chapter 7. The Reveal Behind the Holly. The drawing room was quiet now. The earlier tension softened into a watchful anticipation. Miss Marple sat in her favorite chair by the hearth, knitting needles set aside, eyes bright and attentive. One by one, villagers gathered around, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and polite deference. The warmth of the fire and the scent of pine reeds filled the room, a comforting contrast to the gravity of the discussion that was about to unfold. Miss Marple cleared her throat gently and began. "My dear friends," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying the authority of quiet knowledge, "I believe it is time we review the events of the Christmas garden party, not to assign blame recklessly, but to understand what truly transpired." She motioned for everyone to settle, encouraging a composed attentiveness. It is often the smallest details, those we overlook in the bustle of festivity, that can reveal the clearest truths. She began by recounting the first incident, the collapse after the celebratory toast the anxious reactions, the handkerchief discovered among the holly bushes, and the subtle footprints leading to the garden gate left ajar. Each detail was presented carefully, connecting observable behavior to underlying motive. Miss Marple's gentle explanations highlighted how nervous glances, small tremors, and hesitation spoke volumes about the intentions and guilt of those involved. Her audience listened intently, leaning in as she moved through the sequence of events. She described the second collapse at the Christmas pageant, the misaligned wine glasses, the faint scent of almonds and perfume, and the letters uncovering long-buried rivalries. In each case, she demonstrated how seemingly trivial or ordinary objects, napkins, envelopes, even the placement of a chair, could be instrumental in understanding a crime. Miss Marple's tone was measured and empathetic. She acknowledged the pressures of village life, the tensions, and the rivalries that, though long dormant, had subtly influenced behavior. She spoke with an understanding that human nature is fallible and easily swayed, yet capable of revealing its own secrets through minute inconsistencies. Her explanations were methodical, each observation logically connecting to the next, forming a coherent picture without ever raising her voice or casting undue aspersions. As she paused to indicate the final piece, a villager leaned forward, eyes wide, and gasped. Miss Marple held up a small, seemingly innocuous object, a napkin subtly marked and placed earlier during the stage rehearsal. This, she said softly, was not merely decoration. It marks the moment and method of the fatal toast, and it connects directly to our unfortunate victim. The sudden recognition in the faces around her made it clear that the threads of the mystery were finally coalescing in their minds. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire, as I turned toward the item in Miss Marple's hand. A single object, so simple, had revealed the carefully hidden truth. In that pause, the full weight of the revelation settled, and every villager understood, in their own way, the intricate dance of secrecy, motive, and observation that had led to the unmasking of the culprit. The room remained hushed, the firelight dancing across the polished wooden floors, illuminating faces both tense and expectant. Miss Marple, seated with calm dignity in her favorite armchair, allowed a moment of silence to settle, giving the villagers space to absorb the weight of the evidence she had laid before them. The handkerchief, the footprints, the napkin, the subtle gestures, each carefully observed clue had led to a single, undeniable truth. At last, a figure rose from the corner, a slight tremor in their hands betraying the emotions they tried to conceal. The room held its collective breath. With a voice low but steady, the culprit began to speak. Their confessions spilled forth, detailing actions taken in a moment of desperation, yet rooted in long-standing jealousy and resentment. A rivalry over the garden competitions, festering disagreements over property and inheritance, and a simmering envy of the victim's social standing, all combined to twist intention into fatal action. I did not mean for it to go so far. The confession continued, eyes cast downward, voice quivering. It was a foolish attempt to teach a lesson, to assert myself, and I lost control. The words, though spoken quietly, resonated through the room, echoing the complexity of human motives that Miss Marple had observed from the very beginning. A gasp swept among the villagers, followed by murmurs of shock and disbelief. Faces that had moments before been confident in judgment now showed surprise, some tinged with relief that the truth had emerged at last. Mrs. Penworthy's lips pursed, as though attempting to reconcile her long-held suspicions with the gentle reality unfolding before her. The constable, standing near the mantel, straightened with an approving nod, acknowledging the subtle brilliance of Miss Marple's methodical unraveling of events. Miss Marple's gaze softened as she listened to the confession, her mind reflecting on the quiet tragedies of village life, the petty rivalries, unspoken grievances, and unacknowledged emotions that often simmered beneath the veneer of politeness. In small communities such as Marleycombe, she mused, human nature was laid bare in ways that were both revealing and dangerous. A kind word, a slight gesture, or a misread expression could carry consequences far beyond imagination. Yet, as always, observation, patience, and gentle understanding illuminated the path toward resolution. The culprit, now calm yet somber, was led quietly to a seat near the hearth. Miss Marple offered a few words of measured sympathy, acknowledging the pressures of envy and ambition without excusing the act itself. She spoke of human frailty with empathy, illustrating that even in moments of error, there was room for reflection and learning. Around the room, the villagers began to exhale collectively, the tension slowly dissolving. Relief mingled with lingering sorrow, but the sense of community, though shaken, endured. Outside, the winter dusk deepened, soft snow beginning to settle on rooftops and hedgerows, and within, the warmth of the fire and the gentle rhythm of conversation restored the cozy atmosphere of Marleycombe. In that quiet glow, the mystery, intricate and shadowed though it had been, had finally reached its gentle resolution. Chapter 8. Hearth and Harmony Restored. The first light of morning spilled softly across Marleycombe, dusting the village in a crisp layer of snow that glimmered like sugar crystals on the rooftops and hedgerows. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the faint scent of burning peat into the frostbitten air. Life, in its steady, comforting rhythm, began to return. Shopkeepers swept the steps of their stores. Children built miniature snowmen along the lane, and the distant chimes of the church bells rang clear and serene, signaling that the village had survived the turbulence of recent days. Inside the Red Lion tea room, a kettle whistled gently as Mrs. Penworthy arranged steaming teacups, the aroma of spiced tea mingling with the lingering scent of pine wreaths. Villagers exchanged quiet smiles and gentle nods, their conversations light and cautious. Some spoke of the resolved incidents at the Christmas garden party, their voices tinged with a lingering shock of revelation, while others shared small domestic concerns, the progress of holiday baking, the best method to frost mince pies, or the arrangement of holly on the windowsills. Even in these ordinary exchanges, Miss Marple recognized subtle remnants of tension, a whisper of unease beneath the customary cheer. Outside, the snow continued to settle, softening the hard edges of paths and lanes. Villagers wandered to and fro, greeting one another politely, some pausing to comment on the beauty of the winter morning. The air was filled with the crunch of boots on frosted cobbles, laughter from children playing in carefully made forts of snow, and the faint rustle of a stiff wind through bare branches. Miss Marple, strolling quietly along the paths in her warm cloak, observed it all with a practiced eye, a glance too fleeting, a gesture slightly too careful, an expression of attention that lingered a moment longer than expected. These were the echoes of the small secrets that never fully disappeared, no matter how much the village wished for calm. Back in her sitting room, the elderly detective settled near the hearth with a cup of steaming tea, the rhythmic click of her knitting needles a comforting companion. She reflected on the past days, the faint traces of jealousy and rivalry, the careful orchestration of events that had nearly gone unnoticed, and the remarkable resilience of her fellow villagers. Marleycombe had endured disruption, fear, and revelation, yet its warmth and gentle charm persisted, restored now to its familiar cadence. Even as the snowflakes continued to drift lazily outside, Miss Marple noticed, with a small, knowing smile, that not all stories were entirely resolved. A subtle hint, an absent glance, a half-hidden envelope, a shadow of hesitation, reminded her that the village's quiet life, though restored, still held layers of human nature and delicate mysteries waiting to emerge. With the kettle whistling once more and the gentle hum of village life continuing, she sipped her tea, content in the knowledge that harmony had returned, yet quietly aware that attentive eyes might still notice secrets lingering just beneath the surface. Marleycombe, cozy and serene, had its peace, but its stories and the lessons of human behavior were far from over. The fire crackled softly in Miss Marple's sitting room, casting a warm, flickering glow across the familiar furniture and the neatly arranged stacks of correspondence she had collected over the past weeks. Outside, snow continued to settle lightly on rooftops and hedgerows, muffling the village in a gentle silence. The events of the Christmas garden party, the subsequent mishaps, and the quiet confessions had passed into memory, leaving Marleycombe with a restored sense of calm. Yet in the quiet, Miss Marple knew that the rhythms of human nature persisted, subtle and enduring beneath the surface of ordinary village life. Seated in her favorite armchair, a steaming cup of tea in hand, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She thought of the villagers she had observed so carefully, their glances, their small gestures, the faint tremors of nervousness, the flashes of kindness and courage, and the occasional folly that had nearly led to tragedy. Life in Marleycombe, she considered, was like the finest lace, delicate, intricate, and composed of countless tiny threads, each one contributing to the larger pattern. It was in these small details, often overlooked by casual eyes, that the true character of the village and its people was revealed. Her mind returned to the letters she had read, the misplaced napkins, the footprints, and the handkerchief. Each item had seemed insignificant alone, yet together they told a story of envy, rivalry, and ambition tempered by human vulnerability. She reflected on how fear and jealousy could fester quietly, how kindness could be overlooked, and how simple attentiveness, listening, observing, and noticing what others dismissed, could uncover the most important truths. Miss Marple allowed a soft smile to cross her lips. Despite the unsettling events, she found comfort in the resilience of the villagers. Their capacity for remorse, for reconciliation, and for continuing daily life despite fear and suspicion was a testament to the enduring human spirit. Even in the midst of mistakes, secrets, and hidden grievances, there remained room for reflection, learning, and, ultimately, kindness. She lifted her teacup and inhaled the fragrant steam, letting the warmth spread through her hands and heart. For a moment, the events of the past days felt almost like a distant story, a tapestry of human foibles and subtle wisdom, woven together beneath the frosted hedgerows and twinkling Christmas lights of Marleycombe. With a gentle glance toward the window, Miss Marple spoke softly to herself, though her words seemed meant for the attentive listener as much as for her own reflection. It is often the smallest details, the briefest glance, or the faintest gesture that reveal the truths we most need to understand. In any community, even the quietest among us has a story, and the observant I may yet uncover what lies hidden. Outside, the village remained serene, the snow gleaming under the soft morning light. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and Miss Marple, her mind both at rest and alert, sipped her tea once more. In that quiet moment, the story of Marleycombe concluded, leaving the village richer in understanding and offering the audience a gentle invitation to look closely, to notice the small signs around them, and to appreciate the intricate patterns of human nature that unfold every day, often unnoticed. The snow had settled fully across Marleycombe, softening the outlines of cottages, garden gates, and the winding lanes. Smoke rose in lazy curls from chimneys, mingling with the crisp winter air, and the village exhaled a contented sigh of normalcy. Inside the cozy homes, the scent of pine, spiced tea, and freshly baked treats filled the rooms, a gentle reminder that life, even after disruption, always found its rhythm once more. The events of the Christmas garden party, the startling collapses, and the unraveling of hidden rivalries had left their mark, yet the village had endured, warmer and wiser for it. Miss Marple, seated comfortably in her favorite armchair by the fire, knitted quietly, the soft click of her needles keeping time with her thoughts. Her eyes, sharp and observant as ever, wandered over the familiar objects in the room: letters, carefully placed evidence, and a few stray holly sprigs she had gathered over recent days. In her own gentle way, she reflected on human nature, the quiet lessons hidden in ordinary gestures, and the subtle truths that often reveal themselves only to those willing to notice. She sipped her tea, content in the knowledge that peace had returned, and that the village, though forever changed, was safe once more. And now, dear listener, as the fire crackles and the snow blankets the world outside, we invite you to linger a moment in Marleycombe with us. Which clue do you think revealed the culprit first? Would you have noticed the handkerchief tucked among the holly, or the mismatched wine glasses by the dessert table? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every small observation matters, just as Miss Marple observed every detail that led to the gentle resolution of this mystery. As the glow of the fire warms the room and the village settles into quiet harmony, let us remember, even in the calmest of places, stories unfold, secrets linger, and keen eyes can always reveal the hidden truths. Thank you for joining us in this cozy journey, and may your own observations bring insight, curiosity, and delight wherever you may wander.